Welcome to Front Office Pros. Today, we're going to be talking about some Dynasty bounce backs. That's right, some players poised for 2025.
Hike!
Joe, when it comes to Dynasty fantasy football, setbacks are inevitable, but that means that there's some opportunities to acquire some undervalued assets. So we're going to be talking about some players who may have disappointed you in 2024, but we believe hold some promise heading into 2025, and we think they're going to have a strong rebound or, as we say, bounce back player. So, Joe, who do you got as your first one? We're going to be talking about two each.
Yeah, first one is going to be wide receiver Jaylen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins. Talk about a bounce back, Steve. I mean, he's currently the finishing the season here as the wide receiver 48. And talk about, last year he had 104 targets, 72 receptions for over 1,000 yards, also had 4 touchdowns. This year he had 83 targets, 58 receptions for 744 yards, and only 2 touchdowns. So obviously big disappointment, but the Miami Dolphins offense definitely didn't really hit their stride. Tua got banged up early in the season, missed some games. Rich really hurt them. And then even when he came back, they had a new philosophy of just getting the ball out of his hand as quickly as possible. So he wasn't taking the hits, limiting his chance for concussions when he did come back, leading to, I feel like, Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle to be disappointing. He's a guy that I had high hopes for. I know other people did as well. But despite this disappointment, he did still have 15.5% of the overall target share of the Dolphins offense. And, being how this press conference ended in the game, not sure if you saw, I'm sure you did. Most people have. Tyreek Hill, going out and mentioning the fact that, alluding to the fact that he's not going to be back with the Miami Dolphins next year as he's thinking about his career, thinking about his family and how to best move forward. And talking about a guy who had 123 targets this season, and he had a 22% target share in the Miami Dolphins offense. So that could be out the door, leaving big opportunities for Jaylen Waddle to kind of fill in next year and hopefully get back to, the 1,000-yard seasons and over 100 targets.
I'm really surprised in you because you're typically the one who doesn't like to overreact based on something said in the media. Typically, when that happens, you're kind of like, don't worry about it, Steve. It's not gonna happen. He's just saying stuff. He'll be fine by tomorrow. So I'm a little surprised that you're thinking that Tyreek Hill is going to be on the move. If he is, I could see the thought, but I'm a little surprised.
Yeah, I mean, I just, we've seen it now with the star players. Like, if they're just not happy somewhere and it's just not working out, like, we've seen them force their way out. And not saying it's going to be easy because, taking a look at Tyreek's contract situation, Spotrac shows it as they got the real potential out in 2026 because he'd only have $15 million dead cap in 2026 compared to, the $56 million in dead cap in 2025.
Yeah, but do you think they're actually going to cut him though? I don't think they're going to cut him. I mean,
No,
if they trade him,
right,
then they would be, because of the signing bonus that they've had, with the void years that he added to his deal, he'd have a $28.2 million dead cap hit, and the Dolphins would save $401,000. So that's still quite a bit of money to move off of it. And he's going to be 31 years old. I mean, someone's going to be taking a 31-year-old Tyreek Hill. 2 years left on the contract, but they have no guaranteed on it. So, maybe they could fetch a 5th-round pick for the guy. Not going to be a lot.
Yeah, I still think they could trade him. You're definitely not wrong. I would be surprised if they did just straight up cut him, but maybe they do. I mean, we did see, the Broncos get all that money from Russell Wilson, and heck, they're in the playoffs now with a rookie quarterback. So, who's to say? We've seen other teams take big dead cap hits. Who to say they don't? But I do think more than likely he does get traded, and maybe they just, like you mentioned, take that 5th-round pick or just lower trade value than what they would be expecting.
Yeah, I just don't see it contractually. I don't see them releasing him. I think they could trade him for sure. But I will say I don't know, I just listened to a little bit of it, but the Mike McDaniel interview was weird. Like, typically, he's goofy or whatever, but his answering of what happened with Tyreek Hill, I don't know if you watched it at all, but it's just I don't know. It almost seemed, I don't know. It seemed almost like he wasn't in control of the situation. Like usually when he's like kind of like, happy go lucky, he says, he always kind of is under control. It was one of those things that's like
Right.
he couldn't really speak to it. I don't know. It's a side of him that I feel like I hadn't seen before. So it makes me feel like maybe there is some level of credibility that Tyreek Hill, is just, if he's got it stuck in his mind that he wants to go, he just says, I'm done.
Yeah, and I think ultimately he's just going to force his hand like we've seen other superstars do, and he's going to force his way out of there. That's just what I see happening. And I noticed we mentioned like how the offense changed, and that also involved Jonnu Smith a lot more. And he came back, had a productive year this year, but
His best ever.
They do have a potential out next year if they did want to get rid of him. They'd be looking at like a $2.4 million savings if they were to release him. But he was very productive for them. I think more than likely he stays. But as far as if I would worry about him eating into Waddle's production, I still think there's plenty of room for Waddle to return to being a productive wide receiver like we were expecting this year. That didn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, they've got $10.5 million in projected cap space. That's not even talking about the possible increase that happens. So it's not like they really need to clear it. They're going to need those weapons. So I don't see John going. But regardless, I think the whole thing is I see your point. I agree. I think Waddle is a really bad season for him. And he's going to have more opportunities if Tyreek is gone. Even if he's not, I think if Tua is healthier, plays more of the year, he could be doing a lot better. So I think it's a good call. Are you enjoying this episode so far? Well, if you are, subscribe to our YouTube channel, smash that like button, and hit the notification bell for upcoming videos. We do videos throughout the year, so you're not going to want to miss what we have in store. So going on to my first player, and this one might be a little controversial, but I'm going to go with quarterback Trevor Lawrence. He finished as quarterback 27 on the year. His season was cut short due to a shoulder injury. Only played 10 games. Ultimately, had 284 attempts, completed 172 of them, 2,045 yards, 11 touchdowns, 7 interceptions with 26 attempts, 119 rushing yards, and 3 touchdowns. Kind of career lows all across the board. I think it sounds like, based on the media reports, seems like Doug Peterson's good as gone, same as Trent Baalke. So you're going to be talking about a new regime change there. And I think, there are rumors out there that it could possibly be Ben Johnson, which we've been able to see what he's been able to do, with Detroit, especially with a guy like Jared Goff, who was basically left for the dumpsters, after that trade with the Rams, but he ended up, revitalizing his career. So, if a guy like Ben Johnson comes in, boy, I mean, that could possibly, he's been so well in Detroit, that could possibly change his trajectory. Trevor Lawrence, he's had all the potential in the world. He was the wonder boy that was coming in out of Clemson, but he just really has never materialized. He's looked bad. There's no question about it. But I think that regardless, even if it's not Ben Johnson, I think they're going to bring an offensive minded head coach, maybe the offensive coordinator from the Buccaneers, who's getting a lot of buzz right now as well, who's done really well with Baker, formerly with the Rams. I think it was it Liam Cohen is his name?
Yep, Liam Cohen.
All right, yeah. So he's getting. Let's not forget, he's got a young budding weapon in Brian Thomas Jr. Right, we saw what he was able to do. He's a superstar in the making. You got Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram coming back, as well as Gabe Davis. And if you look at it, he was quarterback 23 his rookie year, quarterback 8 year 2, quarterback 13, and then quarterback 27. So, I mean, I think he could easily bounce back. I'm not saying he's going to be a top 5 quarterback, but he could easily get back into the conversation of a borderline QB1, maybe quarterback 14, quarterback 15. Maybe he can get in the top 10. Who knows? He's got the weapons. He's got Etienne. He's got a couple good options out there in Jacksonville. So I think he's in for a bounce back. I think they just need a change of scenery. The Doug Peterson show, it just got stale, and maybe the game has passed him by. Who knows? But they gotta figure something out and change it up.
Yeah, I do agree with you. I mean, obviously, I agree. Peterson is good as gone. They call tomorrow Black Monday. We'll see what happens there. But they'll be looking for a new coach, and I almost wonder if his coaching or his, whatever he's preaching out there, it just got stale, and the offensive players just weren't really taking it. It didn't really seem to be working what they were doing. You're not wrong. Trevor Lawrence has looked bad. Because honestly, like, with the way Mac Jones was playing at the end of the season, like the offense was actually moving the ball a lot better than it had with Trevor Lawrence. So be curious to see like who does come in there. I'm not so sure it's going to be Ben Johnson. I think there could be other more intriguing jobs out there for him than the Jacksonville job, but we'll see. I do agree though, like if it's not Ben Johnson, probably it'll be some other offensive minded head coach and see if they can't right the ship with Trevor Lawrence and get this offense humming.
Not to mention, if you look at the team overall, you're talking about the only real player that I would say is significant that looks to be a free agent coming up here is Brandon Sheriff, offensive guard, but he's 33 years old, all pro guy for a long time. I don't know what his numbers off the top of my head, but he's a free agent. I would be surprised if they bring him back, just based on his age. But they're scheduled to have $40.5 million in cap space. That's not taking into account the possible increase, depending on the league year, what the increase is. So they'll have a lot of money to spend. They're going to have a high draft pick because of how bad they were. So this team, has some talent. We're a major disappointment. I think depending on the regime that comes in, they could really turn it around if they can really capitalize on the talent that Trevor Lawrence has. That ultimately made him the number one pick.
Yeah, right.
And gave him that contract. He's got to perform because that contract, could look pretty bad in a few years. No, not right now. Absolutely not. So, Joe, who is your second Dynasty bounce back player for 2025?
Well, let's keep talking about these Jacksonville Jaguars, Steve. And, you kind of mentioned him. I'm going to go with running back Travis Etienne, who's coming off of a bad year this year, disappointing. Finishes the RB40. Talking about a top 5 RB finish last year for him, where he had 267 carries, over 1,000 yards. And, the big thing for him last year was the fact that he was able to get 11 rushing touchdowns, as well as picking up another one in the receiving game. So he had 12 total touchdowns last year compared to this year where he only had 2. And, he only had 150 rushing attempts in 15 games versus he played the full season the last 2 years. But he had 150 rushing attempts for 558 yards and mentioned the 2 touchdowns. Receiving game, he was still productive. Went from 73 targets this last year to this year 52. Only 19 less receptions as well. He had 39 receptions, 254 yards, no receiving touchdowns. So, I think the overall involvement, despite the lack of rushing attempts, was still there. And maybe if they are able to get a new head coach in there, turn Trevor Lawrence around, get him back and get this offense back to, producing at the level it was. I still think Etienne is a talented player. He kind of battled through some injuries this year, only played 15 games versus the full seasons he was able to do ever since missing his rookie year. So obviously, moving forward, I am intrigued if the offense does change, gets better, his utilization stays the same, if not increase those rushing attempts to back where it was in prior years. One thing you'd like to see, though, is just his red zone utilization change a bit because he only had 25% of the total offensive touches in the red zone. So obviously, you're going to need that to go up if he's going to improve from the 2 touchdowns that he had this year.
Yeah, what we talked about, I know you don't think it'd be Ben Johnson, but, he could have his own version of Sonic and Knuckles, but maybe the Dollar General version, but having, Travis Etienne, who more of that speed, quick guy, and then you've got more of the bruiser and Tank Bigsby. Be interesting. That's where it'll be interesting because, when you get a new regime change, we talk about, at least I talk about it a lot, you do too, I think. It's a whole new front office. So everybody, they're bringing in their guys. So these are all people from the previous regime. So you got to prove it. So who's going to be the best player? It doesn't matter contract. They want to have the best product on the field. So when it comes to Etienne, when it comes to Bigsby, it's going to be a competition as to who's going to get these touches. So hopefully you can get someone who can kind of be creative in the offense, kind of play to both of their strengths. Because Bigsby definitely he kind of cut into that workload. Don't know if we're going to see Etienne back to the level that he was the year prior, where he finished as, I believe, the third, running back 3, or at least top 5 anyways. I don't know if we'll see that again. And I believe he's a free agent after 2025 as well. So should be interesting to see where the trajectory of Etienne's career kind of going forward at this point. A lot of challenges, I think, as far as, like you said, the red zone utilization. and how do they involve Tank Bigsby and Etienne? That to me is a concern.
Yeah, I mean, even with the rise of Tank Bigsby, he still had 51% of their overall attempts in the offense. It was just pretty good. I mean, we've seen teams being able to utilize multiple backs. I do think, obviously he was dinged up. So from a longevity and a health standpoint, I do think it would be better if a guy like Tank Bigsby is able to supplement and they both can be productive and live in an offense. And heck, you mentioned Liam Cohen. Just look at what the Bucs are able to do with Buck Irving, Rashad White. Like both guys have still been pretty productive. And honestly, like Etienne out of the two is more of the Bucky Irving type. And I would put Tank Bigsby more as the Rashad White guy, even though he doesn't really catch the ball as much as Rashad White. So it is a tougher comparison, but more inefficient runners.
Yeah, I mean, in the NFL landscape, right, you've seen these offensive coordinators be able to maximize opportunities to play to their strengths. So I'm with you, but you just want to make sure you get somebody. If it's a defensive mind head coach, who's the offensive coordinator they bring in to be able to really, change that landscape for them?
Yeah, 100%. You're not wrong. We do allude to schemes, coaching. That all matters, and it's definitely something to pay attention to, especially in dynasty leagues where you've got a long-term investment on these players.
So last player we're going to be talking about here is going to be wide receiver Chris Olave of the New Orleans Saints. This one's an interesting one, Joe. Finished as wide receiver 92 on the season. He had multiple concussions during the year, only played 8 games. Some thought he may retire due to the amount of concussions he's had, and he had that spat, or sounded like with Derek Carr, and that he basically was throwing him into
hospital balls.
Injuries. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. That's the official term here. But he had 44 targets, 32 catches, 400 yards, and a touchdown. Very disappointing season. 19% target share. Prior to that, he had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Chris Olave is going to be coming up here. The Saints have to decide whether or not they're going to accept his 5th-year option, which is a fully guaranteed option. Based on his injury history, we're talking about, I don't know what's going to happen. You're talking about definitely a new head coach. I don't know if Mickey Loomis is going to be gone as a general manager. I would think that possibly is determined based on who the head coach is and if they want their own general manager, or maybe the Benson family feels that they want Loomis to stay because he's been a staple for years there. So I don't really know. But all I know is the New Orleans Saints cap situation is absolutely miserable. They are in cap jail. They are projected to have negative $78.4 million. That's right. Negative $78 million.
Sounds like my dynasty team.
It does, Joe. So as you and I both know, there's ways around it. You're going to have a guy maybe like Cameron Jordan who probably retires. Maybe even a guy like Demario Davis who retires. A Tyrann Mathieu who retires. That would be great for them if those guys retire. Could give them a boost of help as far as their cap situation is concerned. But even a guy, what do they do with a guy like Taysom Hill? Could have possibly been a career-ending injury as an ACL tear at a basically Swiss Army knife at the age of 35. There's a lot of brutal contracts here, but I do think that it's possible that Derek Carr is on the move. When you look at it, although you would look at his cap situation and say, how is that even possible? He's got $51.4 million. Well, if they give him a post June 1st designation cut, you're talking about saving $30 million. I would say based on the situation and trying to bring in a new head coach, probably drafting a quarterback, unless they want Derek Carr to be kind of a bridge.
Rattler?
It'll be a competition. I mean, maybe Rattler becomes something. I don't think he's shown anything that stellar to make me think that he's going to have the job going forward. He's going to be there's going to be a competition to be had. They're probably going to bring somebody else in, whether it's a Sam Darnold, as a free agent, or whether they go ahead and draft a guy. They're going to have a competition. They're not just going to give it to Spencer Rattler. But I think Derek Carr could be on the move. But the reason why I share all this is because I think Chris Olave could do well with a change of scenery, having a different quarterback. So I think either you're going to have a new quarterback in New Orleans, or it's possible that, hey, maybe they trade Chris Olave. It's not out of the question that they do. He only has a $6 million cap hit. So if they trade him, they get a savings of $3.3 million, dead cap of 2.7. He may force his way out of there. It sounds like based on him and his brother, whatever, posted on X back in the day, I think they just have had enough. They want Chris Olave to go to a better situation, possibly with a better quarterback, because his time in New Orleans, has been mixed, to say the least. So I think that Chris Olave, whether he stays in New Orleans, if he does, there's no competition for targets as it stands. I mean, you got Rashid Shaheed. That's it. I mean, there's nobody else. So he's probably going to get at least above 20% target share. I think a new quarterback's going to come in that I think would help him. He's obviously going to be healthy. And I think there's a possibility he may go somewhere else. If he goes somewhere else, it's kind of a luck of the draw, depending on who trades for him. But it could be, it's just better for him to get out of that situation.
Yeah. Do you think he's like if they do move on from Derek Carr, which honestly, it makes a ton of sense from the cap situation, and you mentioned the savings, and they got to get out of that hole that they're in. So moving on from Derek Carr would make a ton of sense. Do you think Olave would be happier staying with the Saints then? Because it seems like it was more of a Derek Carr problem than like a organizational Saints problem.
It's hard to know. I mean, I don't know Chris personally, but I would say it certainly would help. But it also I would imagine it's going to depend on who the head coach and GM is, right? I mean, what's the vision that he's casting for the players? I wouldn't be, maybe this is out of left field. They've been talking about it a lot. They've been saying that possibly John Gruden's going to be coming back to the NFL. He was there as a consultant or whatever. I could see somebody like him honestly going to New Orleans. I really wouldn't be surprised. So maybe a guy like him, he's an offensive mastermind, or at least he says he is. So, I mean, depending on who comes in, should change his thoughts on the team. But I wouldn't, I think it'll be interesting to see what happens. He will not, I don't think he will. I think he may say like, look, you need to get me out of here. He may put an ultimatum, if it's the status quo.
Yeah. I was hearing Aaron Glenn possibly as a consideration for that position.
I heard that as well. He used to play there, right, back in the day. Yeah, that one seems like that. Which I don't know if I don't think I would like that very much.
It depends on who brings his offensive coordinator.
That's true, and what would happen as far as the quarterback situation. But like I said, they're gonna someday you're gonna people to say and we talk about the front office a lot. People want to say the cap isn't real. It is real. Soon you got to pay the piper, but you can keep kicking the can down the road. But the Saints are just in honestly a miserable mess.
Yeah, well, they keep kicking the can down the road. I mean, as Alvin Kamara got that 2-year extension, they're just continue, kicking that can even further down, even though they had an opportunity to just be done with them. But yeah, they keep going with it. I do like Chris Olave. He was a guy I had high hopes for this year. I am concerned though about the concussion things, because this is even a problem he's had during, dating back to college. It's been a continual problem with the NFL, and I think he's in a similar boat in my eyes, like Tua. Like, how many more?
Yeah, but you weren't that worried about Tua though. You told me back in the day you were like, I'm not that concerned. It's a lot different.
Tua plays quarterback, right? I mean, they don't. Olave's got way more opportunity to get hit than Tua does, but Tua is also putting himself in harm's way on these runs. He's not sliding. He's still leading you with his head because he's a competitor. So that's more so when he gets in trouble, not necessarily when he's a drop back passer. But Olave is, to me, at higher risk because, he's catching and running the ball, leaving himself open, especially if the quarterbacks aren't going to protect him with the placement of the ball, which is what he had the problem with Derek Carr. So I do think he's an interesting guy. Curious to see, what happens at the quarterback position. Obviously, who's the offensive coordinator or offensive-minded head coach doing that. But I will say just the concussion thing does concern me moving forward with him, though.
Yeah, I mean, you make a good argument. I think the big thing is I'm saying I think he'll bounce back next year. Does that mean he's going to be in the NFL 3, 4, 5 years down the road?
Right.
If the concussions continue to be the issue, no, he won't. I mean, he might only last another 2 or 3 years. We don't really know. But it could definitely happen. I think next year, though, if he plays, I expect him to have a bounce back. There's a question on,
I'm even concerned next year, man. Like, I had Olave in a couple leagues, and how frustrating it was. Like, on the first catch of the game, he's getting one hit, and he's done for the game. He's got you like the one catch for like 2 yards, and just absolutely kills you.
Yeah. Well, but again, where were the Saints though? How much motivation did he have to come back to the team?
Well, I knew he wasn't. I mean, I was, you mentioned it at the top of your saying there. I was one of the people wondering like if Olave should ever play football again. Kind of questioning that based on just because it's not just an NFL concussion problem. He's had these problems at Ohio State, and now that they're following him to the NFL, I'm generally concerned for him.
Maybe he'll just wear a Guardian cap from now on.
No, brother. They've got, you know what? We need to stop these Guardian caps, man. They've got helmets that are just as good as wearing the Guardian cap. Can we just, it doesn't look right. Can we just get everyone a normal looking helmet on the outside and make sure there's all the fluffy padding on the inside that these guys possibly need?
But that does it for this episode. We talked about some Dynasty bounce back players who underwhelmed in 2024, but we believe that there's some promise. We think they're going to rebound in 2025. Thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time.